thank you very much. And it's my pleasure to be here. And thank you for this initiative, Kamala. And it is my pleasure to be a part of this esteemed panel. All protocols observed. None of the ideas, I just want it to be noted that none of the ideas shared here are necessarily representative of the views of any of the organizations I'm affiliated with or nor my employer. So to kick it off, I'd just like to pose the question, why should government, especially in the Caribbean, think about digitization? So maybe if you can zoom in on the second graph, the second image, not the first one, the second one, yeah. So basically, can you zoom in a bit more? What this is basically the e-government development index. That's how I like to sort of begin the conversation, because if we cannot measure it, we cannot manage it. And I'd just like to point out that what this basically is, it's an index of three things, basically. It measures online service delivery, telecommunications, as well as the human capital index. And it is a composite index. And what this shows is that if you look at Guyana and the Caribbean area, we're very much behind. So the Caribbean is very much behind in terms of its development when you compare it to the world, such as Europe, North America, and so on. But how can we, it's to start thinking, how can we develop? Reason is, with the pandemic, you've seen many businesses adapting. Is paper still relevant to run run any government agency? And I just like to highlight in a European country which is very small, and the case study is Estonia, I'd like to highlight, is that it is small, it has a small population, but it also recently had regained independence. I believe it was in 1990, so that's about 30 years ago. And what happened is a success story for them, in the sense that they're now known as the most digital society on earth. And since about, I believe, 2001, 2002, they were able to do their taxes online. So why is it? But not only taxes, they use a digital identity signature. They're able to vote online. Like, they have been able to increase trust in institutions. I can speak about for Guyana, when Guyana had a very lengthy electoral process. So there's currently a great distrust in the public, in certain public institutions, I should say. So why is it that there is this great distrust? And if you end up adding multiple layers of maybe more paperwork or making the system more complex, you're just going to frustrate people. And at the same time, you still have a fiduciary duty to make people's life better. So at the end of the day, what the question I'd like to sort of put things into context with is, why should the Caribbean consider digitization of government? And it has to do with, firstly, people demanding it, and then secondly, the political will to get it done. Because in the story for Estonia, it was an effort by the government to digitize itself in an idea to sort of digitize trust, but also transform the way in which services are provided by the state. And it is through becoming open and transparent with people, you're able to gain trust. But also, I mean, when you look at the downside in terms of cybersecurity, being able to sort of guarantee and secure your system they've used blockchain, but it provides a good model for countries that are now thinking about it. So start, heading into that direction. They use a system called X-Road since 2001, and that is the backbone of the Estonia. And Estonia has used this technology to rebuild trust, creating what's called a user-centric system, responding to citizens' needs. So, for example, there is a natural disaster, flooding, for example. You're able to pinpoint where you are. You're able to verify and validate that you're a citizen and you're in need of assistance, and you're able to get whatever services is needed very quickly. So it works for efficiency as well as it is very cost effective as well. So I'd like to move up to the next image. So basically, this compares 2018 to 2020, and what we've seen is that 18 countries would have moved up into the very high e-governance development index, and this was primarily driven, many say, due to the pandemic and being forced to digitize. So it sort of accelerated that trend. But once the pandemic is over, how do we think about reimagining and reshaping how our society works? What is the role of government? How can we best serve people? And at the same time, how do citizens respond to the services that the government provides? Because people may tend to vote by their feet, in the sense that if one government might decide they're going to deploy a very good model and it gains very good buy-in, it makes political sense. Because then people can say, oh, I know, I believe I saw the other panelists there into procurement. So let's say, for example, there is a portal and it's integrated, and persons can see and track what is happening on the procurement side. It instills trust in the system, and you're able to attract investors, as well as it increases confidence in your procurement system. So just sort of to conclude, because I'm not counting on the time at the moment, sort of to drive home the point is that, one, the system needs to be user-centric. Two, you need to have transparency. And finally, I'd like to end with the question of why should we change or adapt to digital government? I do believe that it is a fiduciary duty of governments to adapt to citizens' needs, because everyone now has a cell phone. There is greater access to the internet. So the question is, why not? Thank you.
Thank you. I like the connection to the fiduciary duty. I thought you were going to go on to say that, I'm not putting words in your mouth, by the way, that from a governance perspective, how do you demonstrate you are acting in the best interest of your organization if you are not entertaining digitization? But I will keep my other comments and go quickly through to Andrei.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. Thanks, Kamla and the board at CCGI for this opportunity again to be a part of Governance Week. And I always like to participate in this Governance Week and in anything that Kamla invites me to. I feel very honored when I'm invited to such things. This particular time, I was a little bit concerned because I'm no IT aficionado. I mean, honestly, I routinely speak about things that I don't know anything about, but I suspect that, in the presence of a esteemed company like Richard and Moonilal and Joanne and Kamla, I should know something. So I'll speak a little bit about government procurement, electronic government procurement, and and the sort of ties that it has with the importance of governance and with the conference theme. And I've done something very clever that I'll show you in a bit. So procurement is the government's ambition. Public procurement is the government's ambition to acquire goods, services, and works. And electronic procurement is, in short, that modality that government uses in which it incorporates digital systems to manage maybe parts or all of the procurement process. So implementations across the world may use electronic procurement only to manage the sort of notification of procurement opportunities. And then there's some that manage the receipt and evaluation of offers. And there's some that manage contract administration and those kinds of processes. But notwithstanding how you implement it, there are a couple of really important components that e-procurement and electronic procurement must have, and the kind of governance advantages that are conferred by e-procurement are really, really interesting to consider. The first one is one about security. And this is something I talk about all the time with especially suppliers. So one of the things that will happen when you look at case law and you look at the way that procurement practice has evolved is, in the past, what we were accustomed to was a tender box located somewhere prominent in a government organization in which a bidder would come to deposit its bid. Now, when a bidder put that bid in, that bidder would be traditionally afraid to leave it because of the possibility of someone gaining access to the bid and discovering its secrets. And that's why, you know, a lot of the systems that have been developed around the way bids should be received and maintained and so on have been so stringent, because bidders' information has to be protected. I'm not sure about Trinidad or Guyana, but one of the things that bidders did in Jamaica is, instead of leaving the bid several days in advance, they would rush to the procuring entity 15 minutes before the close so that they could get the bid in and then sit down and wait for the bid opening, so that they would make sure that nobody touched it. Now, with e-procurement, the systems that are generally deployed are really, really secure. So what happens at the time when the bid is created by the supplier, when it is uploaded into the system, it's encrypted. And so, you know, generally nobody can hack that. In Jamaica's case, the developer tells us that not even developer can access the information in that bid. So it's really, really secure. And that's important from the perspective of ensuring that business secrets are protected and that there's good practice in the way that government relates to the bidders participating. And then the second thing is about transparency. So if we talk about transparency levels, I mean, electronic procurement is one of the greatest ones. So not only do you have the opportunity to broadly publish procurement opportunities, but now you can look at what's happening at every stage in the cycle. The best systems are built in ways that allow audits to be run, and one person who who does any action on the system, those actions can be seen. And so you could get a really, really good report about when things have been done by whom and how. Apart from that, you get access to a wealth of really good procurement information, government procurement information, from the time that a tender starts to the value of the contract award to the person that it's been awarded to. So you could pull data, you could pull reports and make really, really good decisions on that basis. Then the third thing is about accessibility. And I tell suppliers this all the time, and even procurement officials. So in my operational days, one of the things that happened to me once is I had to travel in the midst of a huge tender. And while in the airport, somewhere in the middle of the world, a bidder asked a question that had to be answered right away. And because I had Wi-Fi and I had a smartphone, I logged into the procurement portal, answered the question, and there was no loss or lapse in time. You can be anywhere as a supplier, as a bidder, and submit a bid. All you need is an internet connection and a computer. And so the accessibility is fantastic from the perspective of doing business with government. And then finally, I sort of struggle to characterize this or to put it in a word, but I'm going to talk about reduction. What I really mean to say is efficiency, but I'll talk about reduction. So e-procurement comes with reduction in time, reduction in administrative effort, reduction in costs of audit, reduction in oversight processes. It's just really, really fantastic as an efficiency tool. So if we follow it, security, S, T for transparency, A for accessibility, and R for reduction, we get STAR. And the theme is following the North Star. I'm extremely clever, I know. And so that's where I'm going to leave you for the moment.
Thank you so much, Andrei. You talked about, I'm picking up themes of increasing trust in organization and institutions from Richard, and now you're talking about the North Star. So now I would let Moonilal come make his presentation and then give us an opportunity to respond. Welcome, Moonilal.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And it's always a privilege to share in this forum. Thank you very much, Richard and Andrei. I was expecting something like that from Andrei, and Andrei gave me a good opportunity to start my session. Picture this. Picture a supplier and a contractor trying to get registered to do business with the public bodies. And he comes to me, he said, Moonilal, do you know that I applied 38 times to 38 public bodies to get registered as a registered contractor, paying sometimes up to $1,000 for the registration to get on their pre-qualified list. And up to now, I have not been pre-qualified on one single public body's database. Now, this guy probably would have spent over $40,000 based on what he told me. Now, this is the challenge in that every 3 years, you have these pre-qualification exercise being done by public bodies. And to some extent, they take another 3 years before they even evaluate the contractors and suppliers. And it costs money, it costs time, and lost opportunities for those who are lining up to do business with the public bodies. So that's the old system. What we have done under the new procurement regime is to develop a depository. And I'm very proud to say that it is live and it's operational, even though we do not have full proclamation. And so far, we have 338 suppliers and contractors that have already been registered. Here are some of the advantages. You do not have to come and pre-qualify every 3 years. Once pre-qualified, always pre-qualify unless you do something ridiculous and you get on the ineligibility listing. If you get on the ineligibility listing, that is published to every public body to know that you cannot do business with the public bodies. So that is done digitally now. So that email is sent out to everyone saying that this particular supplier and contractors cannot do business because they have been disqualified and made ineligibility. That's on the system now. But more importantly, to get pre-qualified, you come into the system. We have developed a line of business using the UNSP-SC code, so that that code now will be used by the suppliers and contractors and also the public bodies. So the supplier and contractor comes in, they put in all their information, all electronically, and they indicate which public body they would have been pre-qualified with before. And that through a workflow process goes to that particular public body. The public body reviews all the documents online and say, yes, we are okay with them, they are good to go, and tick the box, they are pre-qualified. What that has done, and that what it will do in the future, it will say we did a sort of a back of the envelope calculation. Every time you have to, a public body has to do pre-qualification, they have to put out 3 advertisements and 3 daily newspaper. That's about $15,000 for every 1 ad. And you multiply that by 2 is about $30,000 for every 2 ads on 3 newspaper. And then the time taken to evaluate all these contractors and so on, at a minimum, it will cost us and save us about 45 million TT dollars every 3 years, just by putting this system in place. What it also does is that it gives visibility to all public bodies of all pre-qualified suppliers and contractors. As I said, the system is live. We have persons on the system. Once we go full proclamation, we will then switch it on, and all public bodies will then be mandated to use the list of pre-qualified contractors and suppliers from that list and no other list. So that gone are the days when you had to pay something underneath the table to get pre-qualified. And if you don't know somebody, you don't get pre-qualified. So these horror stories will be alleviated. Cost savings, transparency, and there is a high level of accountability. So that is in place, and the whole digital system will be required now to be used by all public bodies. Secondly, 6 weeks after the passage of the national budget, all public bodies are now required to publish on their website, on the OPR's website, all the procurement activities, the list of procurement activities that will be entered into in the ensuing financial year. And therefore, that now becomes public information in terms of all the contractors, all the contracts that are coming down the chute, so that suppliers and contractors could be made aware of what they can get and participate in. Another advantage. The second thing is that now you have to report against that list of activities on an annual basis to say how you would have performed. And every 3 months, you have to come onto the database, put in all your information in terms of contracts awarded, who it was awarded to, the price of the award, payments to date, outstanding amounts, and work completed. Just some of the information you have to put in on the system. And that now is consolidated into one master report that goes to Parliament, and it is to be laid in Parliament by the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So that no longer will people hide behind the contracts that they have awarded and who they have awarded it to, how much it was awarded for, and so on. All that is being done electronically. And the system is such that the public bodies have 2 access codes, one with the named procurement officer and the second with the accounting officer. The named procurement officer puts in all the information. It's authenticated and approved by the accounting officer. The other element of what we are putting together is the whole issue of ineligibility listing. So that now is done on the database, so that, and it's published, as I mentioned before. No longer were you able now you have been disqualified from doing business with one public body, and then you go next door and say, well, I want to register with you. There is no discussion, no sharing of information to say that this person was disqualified from doing business. So now that person will be published, not only the contractor, but all officers and directors associated with that contractor will be made ineligible, and they can be ineligible ineligible for a period of up to 10 years. So if they try to come through the back door and register a new company and is found out, that new company would also be delisted. So those are some of the advantages that will be put in place and have already been put in place in terms of some of the areas we are working on the e-procurement system. During the pandemic, we have put in a temporary stopgap in terms of how people can actually send in their bids, to, how you open the bids in terms of just simply by email. You don't send your password, and on the day of opening, your password protect the bids, and when it comes in, you open it on the day, and on the day itself, the persons will provide the passcode to open those bids, and it's done online with everybody participating in the system. So I'll stop there just to give you a flavor of what's taking place on our side of the border. And we are getting very fast in terms of the digitization of the entire procurement system in Trinidad. So let me stop there, and we will field the questions and so on. I'm sure a lot of questions will come out of just based on what I've just discussed.
Thank you very much, Moonilal. I'm taking from your presentation, the benefits are around cost savings, transparency, processing, analysis. I don't know why. Right, processing, analysis. I also took from your, when you talked about the eligibility listing, computerization would also make actually sanctions when they apply much more impactful, because as you say, you can't leave one entity and go next door and say, well, okay, let's start the whole process again, hoping that they're operating in ignorance about your experience at a previous entity. With entities, public sector entities being able to access a database, the computerization of that service now means that sanctions can be more powerfully and impactfully applied as well. Yeah. Okay. Let me ask Richard to respond to what he's heard both from Andrei and Moonilal, and also Richard, in your response, could you give us some, you seem to be familiar with Estonia, that you brought to our attention as being the most computerized society. If you could say something about the age profile of that society, and also what some of the key challenges may have been to move from where they were to where they are now.
So yes, the thing was they're about 30 years old, right? I think they regained independence in 1990, 1991. They looked and they had a lot of engineers and cryptographers in terms of when they were thinking to rebuild back this society. And what they've basically done is they've leveraged what was the competency of the people, and they had very good leadership at the top as well. Some of the downsides which I've read about would have been like, for example, they had something like an elections crisis where persons were they wanted to know what happened with the system. And two, they had their first cybersecurity incident in, I think, 2007. So cybersecurity became the first and foremost priority. And apart from that, when they look at what's called data ownership, the data ownership sort of principle which they defined it as is that the individual is the owner of their own data. So when you have, let us say you have a ID, Estonia ID or e-residency ID, and someone wants to check your health records. When that person checks your health record, if they modify it or once they check it, it is logged and you can see it. Because instead of advertisers selling your information, you're able to see who is checking it, who is making any changes to it. So it gives you transparency and you're much more confident in your data as well as your data protection. So I think that's it. Sort of addressing Andrei and Moonilal's presentations, I think we can all relate it from like a traffic situation. Think of it, you're stuck in traffic and a policeman is directing it, versus when there's a traffic light. When there's a traffic light, the traffic tends to move much more faster than if there's a policeman. So it's not necessarily divorcing the human element from it, but it's making parts of the system which should be, which technology can make better, as well as improving trust in the system. For example, Moonilal spoke about disqualifying persons and, you know, it having a meaningful impact. So right there and then I think putting that stick against it, it is a good move by the government, as well as I think he mentioned that agencies are mandated to publish all of their activities or procurement 6 weeks after budget. So that is good in the sense that they could have significant cost savings if they're able to maybe cut that publishing in the newspaper all of the time and just redirect them to maybe a portal. In Guyana, I know there's the Center for Local Content and Business Development, and that is where all the oil and gas contracts goes through, basically.
Okay.
And from that, I mean, that there you can say that persons are awarded based on merit, because you get an email whenever a bid is out. So everyone can apply. Everyone has the same playing field on it. So maybe maybe the public sector can sort of borrow some of what the private sector has. And herein opens the avenue for potential public-private partnerships, where you're able to sort of give the, or sort of transfer the risk or the liability to the one who is better suited to handling the situation.
Okay.
That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. And someone has kindly shared with us that the average age in Estonia is 42.4 years. So, I mean, I asked the question because I wanted to get some gauge as to the population's readiness for that sort of transformation. But I'll come back to that. Andrei, your response to what you've heard thus far from your two colleagues on the panel.
Okay, so I think I like what Richard said just now about the removal of the policeman and the idea that the state could be transformed from a sort of from requiring so much human input in the governance of its affairs and in directing its affairs. It's really an important concept. So what we are not looking for is the removal of constraints entirely. What we're trying to do is to recognizing that this is 2021, use technology to achieve the same purposes, but just more efficiently. Now, it's really, really interesting to think about how that works in practice. And let me tell you why. There are two quick experiences I want to share. In my operational days, working at a particular place in Jamaica, when I got there, there was a really fancy enterprise management system that could handle communications right across the enterprise and even external communications. But here we were in procurement, and there was one section of the procurement office that would, so the system could generate the RFQs, like solicitations, requests for quotes, and it could dispatch them to suppliers. But what we were doing was we would go onto the system, generate the RFQ, print it out, go to the scanner, scan it back into email, and then use the email to send the RFQ to the supplier. The supplier would then send back his quote, and the quote would be printed, scanned back into the email, and then uploaded into SAP, I think it was. And so what we essentially did was we took an automated process and we re-engineered it to put back human interactions. And so in our digitization efforts, we have to be mindful that systems that can work to provide this kind of automation end-to-end need not be interfered with by human beings. The second experience that I would want to share, that just came out of a meeting not too long ago, where we were looking at a process that Moonilal is currently doing in Trinidad. We've got here in Jamaica a central supplier registry, and we've just launched a whole new system for the acceptance of the applications. Now, what has happened, unfortunately, is in the design and implementation of that system, it really just functions as a glorified email depository. Because while there are several steps that you'd expect the system to handle in an automated way, how it's been configured is to dump a lot of information into the system, which humans will then have to go and sift through in order to make decisions. So we can't get to the state of transformation without recognizing the importance of ceding some of our control to automated processes. We don't want the robots to take over, but we have to be careful that we don't undo the benefits that we can gain from digital processes by, intervening too much. Those are my comments for now.
Well, let me challenge you a bit on that, Andrei, and the panel, because I'm getting information in the chat that Jamaica's median age is 29.4 years. Trinidad's median age is 36.2 years. Estonia's was 42.4. So I would expect that in the Caribbean, just taking Trinidad's median age and Jamaica's as a barometer of the Caribbean, that the trust of technology would be more apparent and at a higher point in the scale in our society, yet we're not seeing the rush to digitization. What do you think is causing that?
Okay, I'll answer first. Three things come to mind. Three things come to mind. One, and I think Margaret has hit on it, is that, you know, without good change management, we are gonna just get stuck doing the same thing all the time. Okay, so that's the first thing. People generally are fearful, especially when it comes to government procurement. You know, we have a system in Jamaica where, you know, you're named and shamed. If you miss a dot or miss a cross on a T, you're published in the papers. So there is a strong fear culture, and anything to do with the spending of government money, it becomes problematic. So there, without good change management and ensuring an understanding of the major principles, we're going to be up a creek without a paddle on that. The second thing that comes to mind is that for some strange reason, we've always been sort of reticent in the Caribbean to innovate and to lead. We almost always wait for somebody from the north to come to tell us how to do things, and we can't do things until we get some kind of intervention like that. I mean, without prejudice to persons from the north who might be on this call, that's just bollocks. We can figure things out on our own, and we can do it by ourselves. You know, I'm not sure why we haven't embraced our own creativity. And then the third thing that comes to mind is that, well, in relation to public procurement or government procurement, Joanne, who cares about government procurement? Right? Like,
sorry, so who cares about?
Who cares about public procurement? It's the most boring thing ever. Nobody cares about government procurement. Nobody really cares about doing it better. The only time you get some kind of energy around procurement is when there's some huge scandal, you know, Udicot, or in Jamaica, Petrojam, or it's only some, you know, at some point when there is some kind of big, important, interesting, bad thing happening that you get a buzz around government procurement. And so I think that if we, you know, direct some more attention towards how we can engage and make the systems better, then maybe we would be able to see the kind of innovation and the transformation that we're looking for.
Moonilal, let me invite you to respond to what you've heard from your colleagues.
I'll just take up on what Andrei just mentioned there, and one of it has to do with the education of the population. If the population understands what could happen if you have proper public procurement and the savings and efficiencies, that those dollars could go towards education, health sector, infrastructural development, and so on. And by sharing that information, they can then get a better appreciation of why you need proper public procurement. What we are doing right now is we are launching out a school program for the young. We almost suggested that we lost this generation. So we're going to target the primary and secondary schools now. We have already completed the program to start teaching them things like integrity, honesty, accountability at that level, to make sure that they understand what are some of the things that they need to be aware of. Because if you don't change the culture at that age, chances are you will lose the battle at the upper age. So the age demographics and so on that is being shared is quite good, but we need to start that education program, and we have started it already with some of the sessions that we have had, open sessions across. We have had over 237 public sessions trying to get people to understand why we need public procurement. Andrei is right. Who really cares unless you have a big scandal taking place? You purchase in some big pieces of equipment and government ministers involved in it, et cetera, et cetera. So we are going to move away from that and take it at the early age, starting changing the whole culture of the country by targeting the necessary age group that we need to do. So those are some of the things that we are doing. One of the other things in terms of the digitization. So if you are publishing the list of activities 6 weeks after the national budget. This at the first time you do it, then ministries and public bodies will get an appreciation of what other ministries and public bodies are doing. And here you can pool your resources. There will be a lot of things that you will now see. And what we are doing is we code in all procurement activities by using the UNSPSC code. So as Andrei suggested, all we have to do is to press a button, pull up that code, and you see all the public bodies that purchasing along that code. For example, stationery, whether or not they're doing computer software and so on, because as many ministries would be buying their own software, you can pull all that resources together and see who is buying what. So the next year that you publish, and the Ministry of Finance could well ask the question, what is taking place here? Why we have all these persons doing their own procurement? Why can't we centralize some of those and benefit from economies of scale and so on? So that's another advantage of digitizing and bringing out that information. So I share the concerns. If you don't change the culture, you would not be able to benefit from some of these massive costs that you're doing. And just to let you know, Andrei, the entire system that we developed was developed by Trinidadians locally. No drain on foreign exchange.
I'm not letting cricket get involved here. I'm not letting cricket get involved here at all, at all, at all.
Could I also say that the company that actually developed the database and so on was taken over by a Jamaican company?
Still not letting cricket.
You can figure it out now.
But one of the things that Richard touched on in his presentation, but we haven't gone back to, is about one of the implications they saw in Estonia of the computerization or the digitization. And I want to come back to ask those who know whether there is a difference between computerization and digitization, or whether they are actually synonymous, but I'll come back to that. You mentioned an increased trust in institutions. And that reminds me, your comment reminded me of it, Moonilal, because at the end of the day, if all those dollars are being saved, but you don't trust how they're being used, you're not really interested. The citizen is not going to be turned on. Camille Facey has mentioned that the private sector trying to do business with government is concerned with regard to public procurement. So public procurement is very sexy for them because it translates into the bottom line. So I wanted to ask each of you, how can the experience of procurement and what digitization, computerization has allowed to happen there, and how you've advanced that agenda, how can we use the lessons from that, translate the lessons from that to other sectors, and in that way also increase the trust in institutions?
Let me see if I can take it up to start off the discussion here. Andrei would have mentioned the whole issue of computerizing a manual system, and the same process and enablers and so on is still used, even though you have computerized something that was done manually, but you still go through the same process. You have to start thinking about the use of artificial intelligence. And one of the areas that you need to do some research in is the whole issue of the use of artificial intelligence, so that some of these things where you have the manual intervention, based on the experience and the data you would have collected, you could write your algorithms, or whatever these people call it.
The algorithms, yeah.
Algorithms. In terms of the system actually making decisions without personal intervention and manual intervention. For example, in the database, we have developed some workflows so that if you as a supplier or contractor register for a certain line of business, you can decide there and then when you're registering, if you want to be notified of any tender that is being going out for request for proposal, request for information and so on by a public body, you will automatically, once the public body publishes that, it comes straight to you without any intervention. So just the mere fact that you have initiated and said, I want to be notified, you are automatically notified once they publish a tender there. So I think we have to get a certain amount of information gathered and data for overlaying it with artificial intelligence so that you go into real digitization instead of computerizing a manual system into the same system, and you just probably don't get any benefits from it.
Andrei?
Okay, so, you know, it's a very interesting question that you ask, Joanne. And so thinking inductively, one of the things that in my experience I've discovered, and certainly from all the things I've read, is that when it comes to sort of trust in government and accountability, something that a lot of people forget to think about is efficiency in government. Okay. One of the main drivers for breaking rules is the inability to just get things done with an appropriate amount of effort. And so what you find happening is that persons who are suitably motivated and well-resourced find ways to corrupt the system in order to get their things done. They may offer bribes, etc. So that if you can get the system working efficiently, if you can get the system running in a way that does not require the expenditure of amazing administrative effort or resources, then you could probably minimize the incidence of corruption. And that could happen in procurement, and it could happen in other places. I shared recently, so recently I had to renew my passport. So we're talking about now lessons learned from procurement, or, you know, and transferring them to government. So I recently had to renew my passport, but maybe this is the other way around. Anyway, and in the past, I recall how it worked in Jamaica is that I would have to go to the passport office and join a line from here to there. And I know it's the same in Guyana, because recently one of my Guyanese friends showed me a photo of a line at the passport office. So recently I had to renew my passport. I went online, filled in an application form, confirmed all of my previous biodata, indicated my signature hadn't changed, made my payment, and in 7 days, I went to an office and picked up my passport, and within 5 minutes, I was out of there. In times past, you would get some touts who would probably find some ways to get paid in order to get you in front of the line, or to do some kind of underhanded thing in order to ensure that you could get your passport quickly and to get, you know, to relieve the discomfort in getting it. So, you know, as we think about procurement and the efficiency gains in electronic procurement, I think that's one of the things that needs to be thought about right across government, is just how citizens interact with government, and making sure that we use digital solutions to increase that efficiency. I hope that made sense.
Because in other words, it's not worth their while to try to, whoever may want to try to work around the system, the workaround will take longer than if the system was efficient. Yeah,
exactly.
Richard. Oh, you have to leave. Okay.
In another 10 minutes, so this might be my concluding remarks. So just start to backpedal it a bit to the computerization versus digitization. So I think a good example might be Guyana's GRA, the tax revenue place. So during the pandemic, they rolled out a program which was supposed to be, I think it was supposed to be completed in 2019. A new, you can file your taxes online, basically. And so basically what I wanted to say is that computerization is when you put in all the hardware and you're able to now start coding. You've inputted all the information, but digitization is when it becomes operational. So you can probably think of it as you've just set up the system, like you now know who are all the taxpayers, but digitization is when they start submitting their taxes online. So digitization is sort of the operation state. And in 2020, it was found that they had 50% increase in tax compliance, primarily because you do not have to go into a long line and submit your taxes. And I mean, this is something that can be replicated across other public sector organizations, especially for things like social security. The passport office, as well as Andrei would have mentioned. I had a personal experience of going in there. I spent about an hour and a half. Then I had to wait another week and go in and collect it. But it is very difficult in terms of doing business. In terms of maybe even opening a bank account. If you can just maybe use your driver's license to open a bank account, whereby there is trust in that driver's license, that is something which would remove a lot of the paperwork and so on, once everything can be tracked and integrated to one single document. And that is something I think the Caribbean as a whole needs to start thinking about in terms of how can you remove these barriers to doing business, because at the end of the day, it's going to affect investor confidence, how you perform as a country, as well as how citizens are affected, because many businessmen are going to be affected. And in terms of actually changing the system or moving into digitization, it becomes a question as who does not want the change. There might be very powerful people that do not want the change. So the elephant in the room might very well be political willpower to get it done. And as well as maybe financing, like where they're going to get it when countries are fiscally strapped. It might not be on the front burner, especially now with COVID, as well as who has the competency to do it. You might not necessarily know who is competent to get it done, like maybe even just designing or drafting the tender to get it done. You might not know who to get it done. So it becomes a question of awareness as well as who does what. You just don't know. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, no, but thank you. I mean, you really kicked us off really wonderfully. I have to now give my wrap up to you while I continue talking to your colleagues. But thank you so much for that contribution and asking the question, why haven't we, or why should we adapt digitization? And I do go back to your reference to it being a fiduciary responsibility, because this is Governance Week after all, and we are talking from a governance perspective. So my question would be, it's so obvious that it needs to be done. My statement would be, it's so obvious that we should be doing it and it needs to be done. The question might be, are we living up to our responsibilities as from a governance context, not doing it? But thank you so much for the graphs and for the questions. And we look forward to you being part of our Governance Week next time round as well.
Great, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, thanks. Now the four of us are down to three. And I've noticed that you've obviously dumbfounded our listening community here, because they're making comments but no direct questions. So
I think there was a question from Camille earlier, Joanne.
Was there a Camille? Don't be shy.
Yes,
Camille, unmute yourself and ask your question. I thought it was a comment actually, but if you do have a question, Camille, I'm not seeing her.
Let me see if I can find it.
Okay.
Yes, I was just asking, thank you. What is the process for denoting a supplier as ineligible, and can the declaration of ineligibility be challenged? It's a little off the technology side, but just wondered about that.
Okay, Moonilal, I think that's directed to you. Because I think that came
yes.
directly
I was just trying to unmute my microphone.
Sure.
So the process is that you'll have to keep proper records as a public body in terms of the performance. So there are three areas in which you can be made ineligible for. One is continuous poor performance, and the key word is continuous poor performance. And for continuous poor performance, of course, you'll have to assess the contractor supplier over a period of time, give them an opportunity to change their behaviors and so on. And for that, you can be made ineligible up to 10 years. And then for fraud and corrupt practices and all these different areas, there are two other categories that if you're convicted, you can be made ineligible for a period of 10 years. So it's 10 years, nothing up to 10 years, but 10 years, full stop. So you get off the system for 10 years. The process is that if an application is sent to us at the office from a public body, or if we are aware of a conviction being undertaken in the courts and we are aware of that information, that comes to us. We actually give the supplier and contractor an opportunity to be heard. So we have a committee that has already been set up to listen to the case being made by the public body and give the supplier and contractor an opportunity to be heard in terms of their defense. And once we believe that there is a good case to answer and there is sufficient evidence, I mean, the one for conviction and so on in terms of corrupt practices is a straightforward case the court would have adjudicated. But the one that will face some challenge with in terms of adjudication is the continuous poor performance. That's the one we will have to really get evidence to show continuous poor performance. Up to 10 years, you come off the list. And if during that period you appeal, or if the conviction for, let's say, corrupt practices has been overturned, you get back onto the list. There is a process. You'll have to appear before the committee. The committee is made up of board members and management of UPR. You are given an opportunity to be heard and state your case. And depending on how the case goes, you can either be placed on the ineligibility list, or you can be, even if a public body comes and make a case and it's not successful, then you will not be placed on the ineligibility list.
Thank you so much for that. I hope that addresses your issues, Camille.
Yes,
Two questions have come up that are really focused on the topic. One's around cybersecurity and hacking. Remember, the topic is about computerization and the transformation of public services. And in thinking about a response to that question, also think about, let me ask that one first, then I'll go on to the second one. What have been your experience or experiences or lessons learned with regard to cybersecurity and hacking? Because you have done a lot of, particularly Andrei, you've talked a lot about digitization. What's been your experience?
This is territory that I'm not really comfortable talking too much about. But you did ask about my experience. Yeah. And so, there is the ever-present threat and the consideration that there is the possibility that government information could be susceptible to very motivated bad guys. And so in any government effort at digitization, at getting into this cybersecurity space, questions of security have to be considered. I can say, because it's been in the public domain, recently in Jamaica, we had a situation where the developers of our COVID result app were actually sort of exposed because there were some gaps in the security protocols that were implemented on the back end of the software. Those have been fixed, but it became really a big deal. Government has a responsibility to ensure that the data and information of its people are not disclosed.
Let me ask Andrei, how developed, you may not know the answer to this, but I just thought I'd ask it. How developed is in Jamaica, your data privacy legislation? Where's this? Ours is not developed at all. Ours is developed to a certain extent, but it hasn't been legislated. So how developed is it in Jamaica?
So to the best of my recollection, and I'm glad that Senior Counsel Camille is on the call and she can jump in anytime now, Camille. I do believe we have at least a bill that has been recently considered, on the way to proclamation as legislation. I hope that's correct.
Okay, Camille, to the rescue.
Yeah, so we have an act, I think we do know, but there's a 2-year period. There's a window for training people and for promulgation before it will actually become effective, because it's going to affect everybody in Jamaica, not just state-owned enterprises. So we're on the road, but still a ways to go.
Because the whole issue of for me, the whole issue of transformation of public services, which will be heavily dealing with personal data, has to be accompanied by legislative safeguards. Unfortunately, Richard is no longer here, because I wanted to find out in Estonia, what were the legislative safeguards that they put in to protect data privacy? I know he mentioned that data ownership belonged to the individual. So if anybody tried to access your data or even did access your data, you'd be notified. So I was just wondering about data privacy and how, because that has to go hand in hand, I would think.
And it's onerous responsibilities, because one of the issues would be, okay, so the PTA list now with the names and telephone numbers, you're going to have a data controller to deal with that. And I mean, really basic things. So I don't know where we came down on some of those smaller issues, but certainly all business people are affected by it. And anybody who really gathers data, you're going to have to ensure it is protected.
Moonilal, I didn't get a chance to ask you the same question with regard to what you've learned that is translatable to other public services with regard to the computerization and digitization of the procurement systems in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, what we are going through right now in Trinidad is in terms of the computerization of the financial systems across all ministries. There is a huge, I believe, Inter-American Development Bank loan that is going to facilitate the whole issue of the financial management across the state enterprises and also the government ministries. And on top of that, they are laying in a whole asset management system. And we have an opportunity also to bring in an e-procurement system to tag onto that, the IFMIS system. And we have been having discussions with the government and the project team that is working on that. So that in itself is going to be a comprehensive overhaul of the system in terms of using it for budgeting, reporting, and also the unique identifiers that they're going to be putting in place to help in terms of the management of the procurement system and so on. Unfortunately, one of the things we have found out is that the e-procurement system that is being suggested may not be able to be used across state control enterprises, for example, the cuts and the NGCs and so on. It will be very good, fit for purpose in terms of ministries. But a lot of the organizations who already have their online system like Ariba, on top of SAP and so on, that's going to be difficult. So we are looking at how we integrate and have some interfaces between the already existing system and the new system that is being proposed, but that is work in progress as we speak.
Well, what are the behavioral lessons? Because at the end of the day, as Andrei has pointed out, what we don't want is staff or people interfacing with the system in such a way that they're replicating tasks that the system is designed to do more efficiently. So what behavioral challenges are you seeing?
Well, of course, there would be some pushback in terms of the organizations that are accustomed with the paper-based approach and allowing certain inefficiencies to continue. Because with some of these systems that we are putting in place is going to eradicate some of those inefficiencies and questionable things that is happening. So we are getting some pushback. But on the other hand, a number of the public bodies have been embracing this new technology. In fact, they are telling suppliers and contractors, hey, you can't do business with us again, go to the OPR. Get registered with the OPR.
Wow.
We are getting some change in behaviors, and some of them are even happy that this load has been taken off their shoulders. Some of the things that Andrei would have mentioned in terms of, for example, if you are pre-qualified on the system and you have documents that will be expiring, for example, your NIS, your tax compliance certificates and so on. The system is geared towards you have to put in the expiry date. 3 months before the expiry date, you get a notification automatically of the system saying this is going to expire, please rectify. 1 month before, you get another notice. On the day of expiry, if you don't fix it, you get grayed out. So you no longer have that human interface to call anybody and say, well, your insurance is being expired. So once you keep that up to date, you remain on the system. Those are some of the things that we have put in place, and the human element is going to be taken out as we go forward with the database and so on. So those are some of the behavior changes that we are seeing. We have good support. In fact, even without full proclamation, a number of state companies have started operating as if we have a full proclamation, which is today, and some of the bigger companies like the T&Tex, the Heritage Petroleums and NGCs and so on, those are all on board with what's taking place.
But not to embarrass you, Moonilal, but that has been a long journey of you creating the trust in your organization.
It is, and I can guarantee that on a daily basis, we have no fewer than 4 or 5 requests from public bodies in terms of, am I doing this correct? Could you help me here? Is it something that we can do better? And those are the kind of questions, and that's why I'm saying a lot of, I remember one of a senior chairman of one of the biggest organization in Trinidad, I wouldn't want to call him in. He said, when you're gonna get full proclamation, boy? I say, well, as soon as the government gives us it. Hey boy, I can't wait. So
wow.
He's a chairman, and I could well imagine why he's saying I can't wait, because of some of the pressures that he faces on a daily basis to do certain things in a particular way. He wants to get that buffer or that support that the OPR will provide. It has been a long journey, but we are very close to having it done. We recently met with the minister in the Ministry of Finance and the Attorney General's office at May 28th, and we sat down to go over in some detail the regulations that we have put forward. That is what is holding it back right now.
Yeah, no, because what I'd like to say, and I say I don't want to embarrass you, but the office, although you haven't had the proclamation, you have established a position. The office has established a position of trust, and from looking in from the outside, that was done by thinking about what can I do to assist the bodies and the organizations to actually be consumers of this legislation and consumers of my services. And you put a lot of things in place like guidance documents, special guidelines. In other words, you made it very easy coming and sitting in an organization for us. And I was wondering if, when looking at the digitization of public services or state services, whichever, whether those were some of the lessons that could be shared with regard to first build trust, demonstrate an awareness and a sensitivity to the needs of the people who will be consuming your service, and then go about on a joint journey. So it's not you telling us, it's you come on this journey with us, because I remember organizations had the opportunity to refine some of the guidelines and documents that you actually put out. And I think those are some of the lessons that some of the other public services could actually use, that you're not doing it to us, you're asking us to come and consume your service, which has a completely different mindset.
Absolutely, and what we found is that once at the beginning it was difficult to get across the message that we are not this big bad wolf. And people thought that everybody is going to go to jail when we enforce these acts and so on. Nobody goes to jail unless they want to put themselves in jail.
Yeah.
And basically what we have found is that over a period of time, we have had several meetings with a key stakeholder, which was the permanent secretaries in the ministries. And we had several meetings with them. We had several meetings with the Law Association. And it's really by giving them that comfort that we are not here to come down on you, but to make life easier for you. And if your life is easier, and we have these systems and processes, because it's a principal approach to how we do procurement now. And you're right, we can, once we have some of these systems operational, you can well imagine that we'll be working together with the state sectors to get these things done. But our one of our hidden agenda is to actually get public procurement as a yardstick. So that private sector organizations will follow what we are doing in the public. We have already had one request from a major ammonia operator to come and share.
There aren't too many of those in Trinidad, so be careful.
I am even tempted to call the name because he wouldn't mind. I'll hold on it. But basically, they are seeing some of the efficiencies that could be gathered for even the private sector. And if we
go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
The tone for the public sector, and that could be translated into some of the private sector, you could well imagine the benefits to them also.
There was a comment that says the challenge I'm reading this comment. The challenge we may have is probably the lack of practicing certified professionals in procurement in the public sector.
Ah, that's a good catch. And I tell you what we have done. We are putting together what we call a learning management system. And all our sessions that we have had rolled out with the handbooks and guidelines, we actually tape and recorded all these sessions. Anybody could come in and go in from doing evaluation criteria, how you do a request for proposal, all that is now online. But in the learning management system, we will take you through different stages like a buyer, a shopper, procurement officer 1, 2, 3. And this is the suite of things that you can learn. That learning management system will allow you to teach yourself. We have also working with the Accreditation Council of Trinidad. We are about to sign a memorandum of agreement with them in terms of accrediting some of the programs that we'll be doing with some of the universities and so on. So all that is work in progress that we are about to bring to some conclusion. So yes, we have a huge deficiency, and I'll tell you, we did a survey, and what the survey showed up is that 67% of the practitioners in the public sector, some of them said, I don't have a clue as to how to deal with this new legislation. So we know we have huge opportunity. We have sent out a survey in terms of the readiness assessment for all the public bodies in terms of what areas that we need to focus on specifically and be developing those programs to put in the learning management system, cater for the needs of what came out in the survey.
Andrei, what's your experience in Jamaica, particularly in response to that question?
Okay, well, I think that we have the same challenges right throughout the Caribbean, and I dare say right throughout the world. Let me tell you something. I told Kamala this a couple of sessions ago. You have two types of procurement people in the world. You have one group that has no clue about how procurement is done, and then you have a group that has too many ideas. And we both end up at the same place, right? Not really getting anything through because procurement is so nuanced. So what we have to do is to make sure that we build into our system of procurement management, procurement oversight, procurement regulation, good certification programs, good methods of teaching people how this thing really works. So in Jamaica, what we have is an HR component. So in your job description, there is a standardized program that's offered through a third party that you must complete. It's levels 1 to 4, and you must have that as a condition of earning the job. Right now, we are working on a unique, I consider it to be a unique continuous procurement professionalization program. And what that looks like is that you've got to take certain credits each year as a condition of maintaining your employment with the government. If we call this thing a profession, it means you need to continuously learn and you need to continuously develop. So we're currently working on that.
So sorry, was somebody going to say something?
No, I was going to say something else. I don't know if you want, right? Because while Moonilal was talking, I reflected on a couple of other experiences that we've had in terms of how e-procurement has rolled out and lessons that the rest of government could learn. And I wanted to seize on maybe 2 of them. The first one is that in our experience, we learned not to assume that everybody had access to good, stable internet. And that's one of the problems that, especially those of us that live in sort of the more central developed areas in the metropolis, in the cities, we just take it for granted that everybody has the similar access to internet. And we've learned, especially through COVID, that that's not the case. And so one of the prongs of our strategy has been sort of staying in contact with ISPs in Jamaica to ensure that there is good internet reach, because most of these things are done online. And then the second thing is we had to learn not to assume that everyone knew how to use a computer. And I'm talking especially on the supplier side, right? So one of the problems that we have is literally we get calls and they say, oh, we don't know what to do, help us, help us. And there is nothing particularly complex about how to get the job done or how to comply. It's just, they just don't know how. And so we have a dedicated, almost 24/7 support team that works with suppliers in particular and procuring entities as well to ensure that they can access the system. And we also accept walk-ins. There are times when people don't even have a computer. So we have a dedicated computer right here, especially for suppliers to come in and upload their bids. Now, there are a couple of legal issues around that, but we feel that that's important because we can't allow this digital thrust to affect the equal treatment of the suppliers. You know, everybody needs to be treated in the same way. So those are some of the other lessons.
Okay, well, let me say what I've heard today in terms of computerization well, first of all, I learned the difference between computerization and digitization, which filled the gap for me, if nobody else. But I heard about transparency. I heard about accessibility. I heard about security and the reduction in terms of reduction of processes, right? I also heard with regard to, someone has asked about cybersecurity again, which is something we touched earlier, but that need to not only have to develop legislation around cybersecurity running in parallel, but also personal data protection and data privacy, running in parallel as well. So I'd like to give you your final comment now that we've had this wide-ranging discussion, and particularly focusing not on your areas of specialization, which is procurement, but on the transferable lessons learned. The top lesson. I think you just mentioned too, Andrei, don't assume internet coverage. Don't assume everybody's familiar with, everyone has a computer. Any other, while you're thinking about your third one, Moonilal, any parting critical lesson that you'd like to leave with us?
I think that during this process, what we have found out is that there is a lot of individuals out there who want change, and they are willing to embrace the change. And I think we don't give enough credit to the average person, that we tend to think that they don't understand. But once they have been enlightened in terms of what is required, you find that they quickly come on board. And I will meet average person. I would be surprised sometimes when I appear on a radio or television program and they said, wait now, you is the person who says so and so and so and so. Well, we supporting you because we need this. That's the language. So what we want to do is to leave a legacy for this country by making sure that this works and works to the benefit of every citizen. And that's our mantra, to leave a legacy, to be the catalyst for change, not only in procurement, but of course, a wide spectrum of this country, because we can use procurement to be the catalyst for change.
Thank you. Andrei.
I would say, you know, don't be constrained by what we used to do. It's 2021. Refrigerators are speaking to light bulbs.
Yeah.
It's in your conceptualization of digital government, of computerization, the sky's the limit, man. I mean, we need to just be really, really clever about how we can achieve really big objectives and to help to find ways to use this technology to help us to get there. Let's not get bogged down in trying to computerize what we always know. You know, push the boundaries, innovate. We're more than capable, and we can be superstars, and we can show the rest of the world how to do things properly.
I think the well-worn phrase now is reimagine. Reimagine. Don't attempt to computerize what you know.
Exactly.
Yeah. Reimagine. Use that opportunity to just start from the clean sheet. Well, gentlemen, let me thank you, because I can now admit, Andrei, I think I know less about computerization than you do. So thank you very much. Thank you, Moonilal. As I say, you have really you have already set a trend with regard to how change needs to be handled. There's a model that I won't name because I'm not advertising for the model, but it really has the acronym is ADKAR, and it really talks about building the awareness, building the desire, giving the knowledge, assessing, and then refreshing. And I think that that's something that you can already be proud of, even though the proclamation isn't there, because you have really set the tone on creating trust in a public institution. So well done for that. Andrei, I'm not in Jamaica, but I'm sure Camille would say the same thing if she had the opportunity. Thank you, gentlemen. And I will now, I'm not, I never remember who I'm passing back to. Is it you? Oh, you
It's okay, it's fine. Thank you, Joanne. Yes. And thanks so much, Andrei and Moonilal. This really was a very good session because as we talk about governance, we want to talk about how we are able to transform things in such a way that our outcomes actually touch people's lives. And I think, you know, this discussion today was really fundamental to that. And especially procurement really is one of the driving forces that should be looked at in governance. So I'm really happy that you guys agreed to come and share off your knowledge and skill and experience with us. We really appreciate it. It was a good end to what has been an excellent day discussing governance in the state sector. So I want to invite everyone, join us tomorrow for day 4. We have a number of really good presenters who would be looking at governance in family-owned businesses. We have Dr. Roland Bertrand, David O'Brien, Erica Luke, Dr. Annette Rahal, Andrew Boyle from Guyana, Margaret Oren, who is in Canada, Dale Parson, Peter Ganto, Halek Rajkumar, and I forgot to say that Erica is from Barbados. So we have a nice regional panel, and we'll be talking about, you know, a lot of the challenges that are so important because the majority of our businesses are owned by family. So let's see how we can improve governance in family-owned businesses as well. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a good evening now.
Thank you. Thank you, Kamala.
Bye.
Thank you, Faye.